Don't forget.
Watch out.
Remember.
That was pretty good, actually.
Woohoo! Top 5 movies! Originally, this one was gonna be a bit higher, but like a couple of movies this year, I did notice some minor flaws upon rewatch. But that's not to discredit In the Heights whatsoever, as it's still one of this year's best movies for a variety of reasons. The direction is solid, the acting is great, the sets are extremely well designed and do a good job of showcasing Washington Heights and Manhattan proper, and the songs are another job exceptionally well done by Lin-Manuel Miranda, from the performances to the lyrics to the choreography, although this scene where these two characters walk on the side of a building was kind of weird, even if I still liked the song. Not to mention that this movie feels right at home for the time it was released, since it had a reminder that even if times are difficult, you still have friends and family there to support you, which not only resonated with me while struggling with my own depression and anxiety, but I'm sure it'll be able to resonate with plenty of other people feeling increasingly alone during the ongoing pandemic. Now, what kept Heights from going, well, higher on the list was that it sometimes seemed to struggle with trying to give satisfying arcs to each of its characters, plus the editing was a bit wonky at times, but at the end of the day, In the Heights was still an extremely enjoyable watch for someone who hasn't even seen the original show on Broadway, so check it out if you haven't already. It's definitely among one of this year's strongest films, even if we still got 4 more to go.
That was pretty good, actually.
Ever since Sony Pictures Animation released Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in 2018, they've quickly rose from being looked down upon by the animation industry to being a real contender for studios like Disney and DreamWorks, where with the exception of Hotel Transylvania 4, all of their movies have gotten consistently positive reviews from critics. They've still got some duds here and there, at least in my mind, as I thought that the Angry Birds movie 2 had no reason to exist beyond nostalgia, while at the same time being extremely unfaithful to the lore of the games. Wish Dragon was way too similar to Disney's Aladdin for me to find any enjoyment in it, and Hotel Transylvania 4 was an unneeded and annoying conclusion to a rather mediocre franchise, but for the most part, they're a lot different from how they used to be back in the early to mid 2010s. And a prime example of how far Sony Animation's come since then would be none other than The Mitchells vs. the Machines. At first, I was a bit skeptical about this because the first trailer felt like it was gonna be a movie that said, phones are bad, go read a book or something, I don't know. However, once it came out on Netflix, it proved to be anything but a movie for boomers who hate technology, as not only does it showcase how modern technology is both a blessing and a curse in this day and age, but the rest of Mitchell's was fantastic. The jokes were consistently hilarious, the acting was really good, the characters all had some really endearing arcs, as well as the villain being one of the most intimidating animated antagonists I've seen in recent years, despite how she's literally a phone. The emotional moments were extremely powerful and even squeezed some tears out of me on rewatch, and I could go on for days about the animation. Not only does the character animation itself look great, but there's so many neat little visual details that didn't need to be in the movie, but they were in it anyway, and they only give me more appreciation for the sheer creativity and passion put in by the people who made it. Some people have criticized the large amount of 2D visuals in the film, and I can see why, since there are a lot of them, but I only see it as making an already great movie even more creative, showcasing the weird way Katie views the world, while also making sure to be more down-to-earth for certain scenes. Really, there's a lot for me to love about Mitchell's. It may only be number 4 since some of the writing choices were a bit weird and Katie herself was a bit selfish in some scenes, but at the end of the day, The Mitchells vs. the Machines was an absolute blast, and it deserved every single bit of praise that it received.
That was pretty good, actually.
Originally, while I was developing this video, I was gonna have Raya and the Last Dragon somewhere around this spot. However, after hearing some criticisms from other people and rewatching the film to see if those criticisms held any scrutiny, yeesh, why did I originally give this an almost 10 out of 10? Nowadays, it scores probably a low 5, bordering on a 4, so obviously it wouldn't be able to make this list. However, for the other Walt Disney Animation Studios film we got this year with Encanto, I originally gave it a somewhat low 8 out of 10, but after rewatching it, wow, it was way better than I originally gave it credit for. Now, yes, it does have an admittedly basic coming-of-age story about someone being different from their peers and going on an adventure to prove themselves worthy that we've seen time and time again. However, what makes Encanto work is its execution. It takes its relatively boring plot and really goes all out with the possibilities, delivering some really powerful moments with its characters, and also going in depth on some subjects that really resonate with me, such as anxiety, imposter syndrome, damaged relationships among family members, and conforming to what people expect from you instead of doing what you're comfortable with. Not to mention, it makes characters like Bruno and Mirabel much more endearing, but seeing them succeed feels earned. And unlike Raya, seeing the main character forgive the person who hurt them is extremely satisfying because Alma's cowardice and toxicity was a result of trauma that she endured after losing her husband, and that she was worried she'd face that again with Mirabel not getting a gift and Bruno's gift hurting those around him, while Namaari being forgiven and trusted was extremely stupid and downright irresponsible since she had frequently betrayed the trust of the other characters throughout the film, so she really didn't deserve forgiveness after everything she did. Here though, while Alma does admittedly bring the movie's quality down from being higher due to the way she acted in the third act being rather spineless, I was able to understand that since she only wanted to keep her family safe, but only hurt them in doing so, and the scene showing her losing her husband and Mirabel forgiving her was honestly one of the most powerful scenes in any Disney movie. Also, regarding the songs, which were once again written by Lin-Manuel Miranda, they were easily some of the best parts of the movie, either providing more insight on the characters or simply giving this movie some more lighthearted fun. And each one has plenty of great singing and lyrics to go around. Oh, and did I mention that the animation is absolutely gorgeous in showing off the culture of South America while also providing some stellar character animation and incredible landscapes and backgrounds? Well, I don't think I did, so I'll mention it while I still can, since I didn't give Encanto nearly as much credit originally as it deserved, because there's just so much stuff here to enjoy that it's easily among one of the best Disney movies to come out in recent years. And since this is also the 60th feature film from Disney Animation, it's kinda like Tangled was their 50th when it came out, because it was able to pay tribute to Disney's past achievements and how far they've come since, while also being a gateway for what can be done by them in the future. And even if Disney's made plenty of despicable business decisions recently, especially with Bob Chapek as the CEO, Encanto is a great reminder that just because Disney's a bad company doesn't mean all their movies are bad. Okay, they've made plenty of garbage in the past, but they can still make some great stuff. And Encanto is a great reminder that Disney can still make some great stuff.
That was pretty good, actually.
For the longest time, I was certain that The Suicide Squad would be this year's best movie. I did at one point think Dear Evan Hansen could be up there as well, but that was only when I was naive and hoped it could be a faithful portrayal of mental illness, which it ended up showcasing, as well as someone playing with matches at a fire safety seminar. But back onto The Suicide Squad, while it may not have gotten to number 1 like I thought it would, that's not to discredit it whatsoever. I did used to think that the 2016 Suicide Squad was fine for whatever reason, but I rewatched it after a while and I thought it sucked. But opinions change sometimes, you know? But as for The Suicide Squad, it basically takes everything that failed in Suicide Squad and does it way better. Instead of long, dragged-out character introductions, these characters are introduced with maybe a few lines of dialogue about their backstory, and the plot is still able to move forward without grinding to a screeching halt. Instead of the character choices being utterly confusing, the main characters here are still a bit out there, especially with Polka Dot Man and King Shark, who both ended up being my favorite characters, but each of the characters are still well developed. They play off each other extremely well, and their actors do just amazing. Instead of the visuals being dull, washed out, and poorly lit, this movie is vibrant, colorful, and goes all out with how silly its concepts are and executes them really well, especially with the intense action scenes. And instead of the director constantly getting screwed over by corporate executives, James Gunn basically had total control over what he wanted to do with this, and what he ended up doing was one of the most irreverent, creative, insane superhero movies I've ever seen. I never thought Gunn would be able to get better and crazier than he did with the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but here we are now with what is easily James Gunn's best film, easily DC's best film, and easily 2021's second best film. Again, it was really close to number one, but something ended up being better, and some of you might know what I'm talking about. But let's get some honorable mentions aside first before we talk about it.
That was pretty good, actually.
So, I saw a lot of movies in 2021, and as such, not all of them could get on the list. But some of them still had aspects that I really liked, so let's highlight some examples. Starting off with Back to the Outback. Despite the tiresomely hammered-in message, generic story, and juvenile humor, the animation was fantastic, the acting was great, and the movie's heart was definitely in the right place. Overall, if you have nothing else to do and just feel like killing an hour and a half on Netflix, I'd say that this is a pretty decent watch. Clifford the Big Red Dog. The CGI used for the titular Big Red Dog was rather poor, and the editing was terrible, but I was surprised with how heartwarming it was able to be. Well, when it wasn't being insanely boring, that is, but looking beyond stuff like the CGI, the editing, the writing, and some of the acting, it's not that bad. Cruella. It's basically Disney's version of Joker, despite being nowhere near as interesting or thought-provoking as said film. Heck, there's plenty of stuff that this got wrong, from its pacing to some uninteresting plot points to the hilariously bad CGI used on the dogs, but the acting, soundtrack, and costume design especially were all great, making this one of the better Disney remakes, at least in my opinion. Godzilla vs. Kong. The writing may have been pretty bad, it may have focused on King Kong a bit too much, and it may have been weird how neither of the title monsters won despite how the central focus of the marketing was one will fall, but all I really cared about was seeing these massive monsters fighting each other, and boy did it deliver on that. So, even if it's not the best thing out there, it's still at least something where you can just turn off your brain and have a good time with it. Jungle Cruise. Despite the lackluster script, I really enjoyed the chemistry between the two main characters, in addition to some fun action and interesting concepts. Nothing too special, especially given some of the better movies we got this year, but it was still good for what was delivered. Luca. A bit better than I thought of it at first. It really succeeds in the scenes that are slow-paced and comforting, along with having some great animation per Pixar standards, but it was kinda held back by an obnoxious villain and one of the most forced third-act breakups I've seen from a movie in recent years. So while it's not one of 2021's best, and certainly not one of Pixar's best, it's still worth mentioning. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. It's nowhere near some of the MCU's better films due to its writing and overuse of special effects, despite said special effects looking amazing, but it still has some good stuff in it like the character development, action, humor, and themes about grief. Wow. So that's basically 2 times the MCU had something released in 2021 that had a message about grief. And the person suffering from said grief was the main antagonist. What a nice coincidence there. Or maybe not too nice, because, grief and stuff, but anyways, I'm getting off track. Plus, this is one of the few times where Awkwafina's character is somewhat tolerable. So, that's pretty good, I suppose. Overall, Shang-Chi was, pretty decent, but yeah, there's still better stuff out there. And finally, Sing 2. Remember what I've said before about my opinions being subject to change? Well, this applies to Sing 2, since it was originally a dishonorable mention for my worst list, while F9 would have been an honorable one. But after some more thought, F9 just feels too contrived and stupid for my liking, so I'm having it and Sing 2 switch what sort of mentions they are. But basically, with Sing 2, here's what I liked, and here's what I didn't like. Yeah, I may not like Illumination, but even I'll admit that this is one of their better movies. Hopefully the Mario movie can also be good, but given the information we have at the time I'm writing this, it can go either way, really. And now, the best film of 2021.
That was pretty good, actually.
This was something I didn't expect to feel so strongly about at first. Before it came out, I was sure it'd be good, but I was also pretty sure that The Suicide Squad would be the best film of the year, while this would probably be somewhere in the lower areas of the list. It's kind of like what happened in my worst list, where I thought that these movies would be the bottom of the barrel in terms of last year's cinema, but then this came out and took home the worst spot instead. With that comparison aside, however, the best film of 2021, in my opinion, is Spider-Man No Way Home. Again, I didn't expect much from this. Even if I didn't like Far From Home, I was hopeful that this new one would be somewhat enjoyable. When I saw it though, all my expectations were blown out of the water and delivered what is easily this year's best film. I'll start off by saying that I don't care what some of you might say, the visuals here are great, as is the case with most of the MCU. Even if I have seen a few detractors, mainly in my Discord server, I still thought that the efforts put in by the VFX team paid off tremendously, but that's just on the outside. On the inside, No Way Home is still amazing. Of course, the biggest talking point about it is that all the villains from past Spider-Man movies, in addition to Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, have returned, and they are absolutely fantastic. Similar to Ghostbusters Afterlife, the fan service here feels extremely welcome and actually has a point to the story, while at the same time not being too distracting. Hell, even the references to Spider-Man memes were well executed, unlike how some other movies have implemented meme references in the past. But back on track, it's not just the returning characters who are good, all the characters are very well written. Tobey and Andrew are great to see, and they have some solid chemistry with each other and Tom Holland, Green Goblin being one of the best main antagonists in the entire MCU, and Tom Holland's Peter actually having a great payoff to his arc. In the first 2 Spider-Man Home movies, even though I enjoyed Homecoming, both it and Far From Home didn't feel like they had any major stakes or revelations for Peter's character. Here, however, in the wake of controversy surrounding his battle with Mysterio in Far From Home, Peter ends up not only being accused of something he was innocent of, but in trying to save the villains from having the same fate, which gives us a solid message about rehabilitation over punishment, which I'm sure that the American prison system can learn a thing or two about, as well as in trying to have Doctor Strange help clear his name despite Strange's warnings. He ends up losing someone close to him with Aunt May, and he ends up choosing to have the entire world and all of his closest friends forget who he was. And both of those scenes had me bawling in my theater. What's more is that he always aspired to be like Iron Man in his other MCU appearances, and here he was able to give a sacrifice similar to Iron Man's, but even if he'd still live, nobody would remember him, which only makes this movie more tragic and emotionally satisfying. Honestly, I could go on and on about No Way Home's accomplishments. I mean, there's even some minor details that I loved. The direction was great for the standards of someone who'd only directed 4 other movies before this, and that does include the other 2 MCU Spider-Man movies. The score is fantastic and only adds on to why I believe Michael Giacchino is the modern John Williams. The movie was more or less able to save movie theaters struggling from the pandemic by becoming the second highest grossing film in the history of cinema to not be distributed by Disney, although the number 1 spot could still go to Jurassic World since Titanic and No Way Home did have involvement with the company Disney owns. There is so much for me to say about Spider-Man No Way Home, but at the end of the day, it's easily the best film of the year, and probably the best film in the entire MCU if I'm being honest. That might sound like high praise, but I loved this movie, like, a lot. I don't know what else to say other than how I'm excited for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but yeah, No Way Home was definitely able to find its way to the top spot on this list. Okay, so that's both my top 10s done with, and honestly, 2021 was a big year for me and my channel. While 2019 saw my first VidCon and my first season of Isaac Reviews, 2021 saw much greater growth to my channel, as well as new techniques I've learned to make my videos better and more professional. Of course, there was an occasional controversy here and there, which I may or may not make a video about, but I probably shouldn't because I don't want more controversy. But it's safe to say that even in COVID times, 2021 was a big year for me. Let's hope 2022 can also have my channel become bigger, although with the stuff that's been happening in the first 3 months of this year, it's safe to say that we're not going to be getting a break from this world's craziness anytime soon. But thanks for watching this video. It took a lot of time and effort, but I hope it all paid off in the end, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!